Okay, so welcome to office hours for Generate Release 13.1. We are just giving you guys like a, I mean, I think most of you joining already know this, but we do this meeting about a week or so before the release. So the release hasn't come out yet. We're thinking we'll likely push it out probably beginning to mid next week. If anything changes or we are super delayed in timeline, we'll keep you all posted. But just a heads up for any of you who potentially haven't joined, we do these meetings about a week or two prior to the release. My name is Liz Brunette. I am the tech lead of the Generate product. Today for our agenda, we will be reviewing the changes included in the version release. We'll be doing a quick review of some Generate documentation. You'll be getting a quick preview of 13.2, reviewing our release calendar, and then at the end, again, for those of you who have been on these calls, you know we do a survey feedback form. If you have a few minutes to do so, we really do use the feedback, incorporate any edits or enhancements that you all suggest in these meetings so that they can serve you all as our Generate community. I know we have that 13.1 open discussion as the last bullet point, but again, most of you know if you have specific questions or concerns about anything that's being reviewed, don't hesitate to unmute. You're welcome to throw anything in the chat. So like, again, most of you know that we prefer to keep this kind of like an open office hours. Johnny will begin presenting here in a minute, and you are welcome to, like I said, chat or just unmute yourself, anything that you all need. Any questions before we jump in? Okay, I think I'm passing it over to Johnny next.
Hello, everybody. My name is Johnny Cunningham. If there are guys that I have not met, that's Tommy. I haven't seen him all day. And then, of course, when this meeting starts is when he decides to show up. I am an ETL developer. I work with states on building the ETL to get data into Generate. And then I'm also one of the developers on Generate. I'm going to keep tossing him, and he's going to keep coming back. He is not used to being shooed away. He gets to hang out. There are people in here who know he's spent the entire meeting sitting there staring at the screen. And there we go. So anyway, we'll jump right in. So for changes for the IDEA reports, for assessments, it was really a lot of cleanup. And so I'll go through these pretty quickly because some of these for the states that are working on assessments, this may matter. And I'm going to keep tossing again. But I'll go through each of these. Previously, I think it was around Generate version 12, we did a sort of a realignment to the CEDS because Generate had strayed slightly. We had some names for things that were slightly different than the actual CEDS name. So we went through and did sort of a realignment to make sure Generate was using the appropriate CEDS names. And then at the same time, we also tried to align everything with the fact type names within Generate. So like stored procedures and views and anything that was specific to a fact type used the same fact type name in the name of that particular object. So in that cleanup again, so we had to change several things. As we were going through assessments, doing our testing for assessments, and then I think, because I don't know if anybody's on from Utah, so I think Utah actually helped us identify this one. There is a source to staging script for assessments. When we put those out, if you're not familiar with those, when we put those out, it was basically just an empty stored procedure name. And the idea being that's where the state could put their state specific code, right? That's going to bring data from the source system into Generate. That's obviously going to be different for every state. So we put them out, we named them with the fact type name, but basically they were blank. States could leverage those. And then in the auto migration page, it referenced those names. So when you ran the migration, the one-step migration, basically, it would run that if you had anything in it, and then would execute all the things within generate. So all of that is the context, so that hopefully this makes sense. We found that we missed that stored procedure, the source to staging, because once we put the basically the blank stored procedure out there, or the empty stored procedure, we don't want to touch that in an update again, because that again is going to be state specific code. So we don't want to touch that. So when we did all the realigning, we missed that one. And it had the name assessments with an S at the end, but the actual fact type name is singular, assessment. So it had a name that didn't align with the auto migration. When it was calling the stored procedure, it was calling the stored procedure without the S, but the one that existed in source still had the S. So we cleaned that up. And I apologize, but that's the second bullet. And then the views thing is, we did some cleanup as well. So we had views that had the S on the end. And we removed those, but somewhere in the code for assessments, that those old views still existed out there. They were still sitting out there. They weren't referenced anywhere. They weren't used anywhere, but they just caused confusion because there were two sets of them, one with the S and one without. So we're getting rid of the one with the S. So these are not anything you have to really worry about, but those are changes to assessments for this round. And then for staff, in a previous version, I believe it was 13, we included zero counts now in the migration. So for those of you that are like, that don't either work with the code or maybe are not an EdPACS coordinator, there's generate handles two sets of counts, right? So it migrates in the actual counts for whatever category, whatever file you're doing, and then it produces the zero count rows that are required depending on the file specification. So that's two separate processes for us. And previously, the zero counts were only created when you would run a submission file, right? So when you created the submission file, it would pull all the counts out of the table. It would run the logic in the background to create the zero counts and insert those into that final submission file. That was hard to troubleshoot for states. It was hard for us to troubleshoot, honestly. So in 13, we actually run that zero count process at the same time as the counts are being populated. So it puts the counts in, then it puts the zero counts in. So all of it now exists in the report table so that you can access those, you can query them. It's much easier to troubleshoot. But in doing that, we found an issue with the staff zero count logic, and resolved that. There was an error in the when it was trying to produce the zero counts to put those into the table, and we resolved that. So that's in this release as well. That's all we have for the special education reports. For the non-IDEA reports, homeless is one of the ones that's coming up in January. So for those of you that have been through this a couple of rounds, I think you know, but just to clarify. So version 13.1 for us, for Generate, supports both of the two submission windows in January. I can't remember. I think it's the 7th and the 21st. But both of those two submission windows. And then the next release will support the two February releases. So homeless is one of the ones that's due in January. This one, I want to give a shout out to Kentucky because I was working with Shauna on this one where we uncovered most of this. There is some logic in there that removes duplicates, and it's very like, I think in all the times that we were running it, we only came across this for a handful of records, but they had some this time. And as we were doing the validation work, we realized that logic was incorrectly removing duplicates, so we fixed that. The second bullet is the school year, adding that to the join. It didn't cause any problems with the data population. It didn't cause any problems with the numbers that were being reported or loaded into the report table. But not having the school year in one of the joins in the RDS migration was actually pulling, for that one particular join, was pulling all of the school year data from the source system reference data mapping. So if you're a state that had been with us for a couple of years and you had multiple years of mapping, it was pulling in multiple years. So it was duplicating some of the records. They were being handled downstream and it was fine. It was getting rid of the duplication, but that was causing migrations to run a little longer. And the record number that you were looking at in the fact level migration to be bigger than it should be. So we resolved that as well. And then the last one, the homeless service indicator, we just didn't have that in the staging debug view. So if you're using the staging view to see how your data loaded, we missed that when we built that view. It's in the fact view, but it wasn't in the staging view. So we added it to the staging view as well. And then neglected or delinquent, we just added support for those in version 13. So we did some additional improvement to make the migrations run a little faster. They were running pretty slow, honestly, for the amount of data that we were pushing through. And like it's a little bigger set, like as far as the joins and everything that has to be done. It's a little bigger, but that did not align with the amount of time it was taking. So we worked on that just to improve the performance of that migration. So if you're going to start attempting any of the entity files, they should also run better in 13.1 than they did in 13. And then the last one, school performance indicators. That set of 5 files, this is new for us and want to call out Mississippi. So we're working with Mississippi on this one. And this is where this came from. So we actually built all of the infrastructure for the school performance indicators so that those 5 files, I think we have it all the way up to the, and I've got it there all the way up to the fact and dimension table. We're still refining and testing the report part of that code. But it now supports migrations all the way up to the fact and dimension if those are files that you wanted to work on. This is actually a new fact type for us. We did not have a fact type for school performance indicators. We were going to leverage one of the existing fact types, but again, sort of like I mentioned at the beginning, we try to align everything with CEDS and we also try to keep things like by fact type, keep all of those things sort of named the same so that it makes it very easy to understand like what pieces you need to use as you're looking at a migration or validating data or anything like that. And so the existing fact type did not really align with what these files are meant to capture. So we created a new fact type called school performance indicators and then built all of the infrastructure for that new fact type. And then obviously built there was already a staging table for it. So the staging table was there. We had to make a couple modifications to make sure that we could accommodate all of the data that needs to come in for those files. But that was already there. The dimensions were already there. There was already a fact table there. We made a couple small changes to those. So the thing that's new is the fact type. The other pieces existed, but we just had to make changes to accommodate this once we really started digging into these files and making sure we could process that data appropriately. So we'll have support for those in 13.1, and hopefully we'll wrap up the report part of those 5, and we'll have those in an upcoming release, or that bit of code in an upcoming release. I think that's it for the non-IDEA. So for the user interface, student details is a thing that was introduced recently as well. And that is for those of you that have not had a chance to use it or haven't seen it yet. When you migrate your data into the report table, and this is for student level data, not organization data. But when you're migrating a student file and you're looking at it in the UI, you get, like, depending on the category set you're looking at, you get all of the appropriate category values, and then you get numbers, right? The counts that fit into each of those groups. Well, what the student details is you can click on one of those numbers and it actually expands a little window with all of the students that actually make up that count. That's the student details. This was a big deal for us. We have been laying the infrastructure for this for several releases, like putting in the foundational pieces that we were going to need. So we were actually able to put it all together in the previous release. And now we're like refining. So what we added was for some of these, depending on the category set, like you may have a large amount of data horizontally, right? And so in that little pop-up window, it was difficult to see. So we added scroll bars that will automatically come up if necessary. So if you're looking at something that easily fits within that the pop-up window, you won't see the scroll bars. But if it's necessary, the scroll bar will automatically come up to allow you to scroll back and forth. Um, the other thing is the total of the education unit. We had a problem with how the student details was going to the debug table to return that data to the pop-up window. So we resolved that. And then for assessments, this was something we just missed initially. In assessments, with the change, I guess, what was that, 2 years ago, where assessments kind of underwent some significant changes, they were segregated into lower grade and high school assessments. And the way we were building the debug table wasn't making that differentiation. So what was happening is when you pulled up the student details, it was sometimes commingling like high school students and lower grade students that had the same category set data. So, very simple example, if you were looking at race and you were looking at number of white students, for instance, it was grabbing both the high school and the lower grade because there was nothing to segregate those by as far as filtering them to put them into that window. So we added that additional filtering now. So depending on which report you're actually looking at, if you're looking at the lower grade totals, you only get the lower grade students. If you're looking at the high school student report, then you only get the high school students. So we addressed that. Log out functionality. And again, I'm going through these pretty quick. Liz mentioned this. If anybody has a question or if something comes up, you can stop me and I can respond or, put something in the chat. I try to pay attention to it, but I think Liz and Taylor are also watching that as well. Log out functionality. We had seen this in, I think Kentucky was seeing this, and we had one other state, I think, that was seeing this. The other states weren't. So it was more in how the web server was configured, but there was a JavaScript error that was coming up so that the logout, if you're familiar with the Generate UI, the logout has a counter. It's a 20-minute counter, and it'll automatically time you out after 20 minutes and then log you out. Well, the logout functionality, not just the timer. So even if you pushed the button to log out, or if the timer expired and the auto logout ran, in those states, there was a JavaScript error that was kicking, that was being thrown when that process tried to run. So you weren't actually logged out. And then the timer was actually doing some weird thing and it was counting in reverse. You'd start getting a negative number. And anyway, so we went through on our side and like through the JavaScript code, and I think we've addressed that. So regardless of the configuration on your web server, the logout functionality should work. We shouldn't see that again. And that didn't impact most everybody here, so you won't see anything different. But if you were one of the states that had that, hopefully that's going to be resolved. And then user accessibility is something we've been addressing. We put a lot of changes in 13, and we've been adding more as we go through. As we continue, like with the generate work, we're adding as much of that as we can. I think that's it for the user interface changes. Okay, so general changes. So for migration work, and I'm going to throw something in here that's not on the slide, but just we've talked about this one before. We had a CEDS work group to talk about some improvements to how Generate accesses the dim people records that are created, and like potential changes to the data warehouse as well, right? That to better accommodate how you need for generate. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm on the generate side, but also anyone that would be accessing dim people as far as any level of reporting, right? So that goes for like the SIG Pro report that we have out, the assessment report, or any state reporting that you might be doing on your own, where you were going to access, or you were going to have to join to dim people. So from that work group, the idea that we proposed was a table called dim people current, which I'm not going to go into great detail, but there basically is going to be a single record in the dim people current. So as soon as a student, the first time a student is added, they'll get a record in dim people current. And then that record from that point on will just ever be updated. There'll never be a second record for that student entered into the dim people current table. There's always just a single record. Dim people will continue to be updated as it always has. And then generate is going to use dim people current, which is going to make the joins more efficient. It's going to make it a lot easier. It's going to eliminate some of the issues we've had in the past where, dim people has multiple records for a student within a single school year. Potential places where, generate might join to the wrong record of the group or things like that. It eliminates all of that. That code is complete and all of the structure and everything is complete, but we didn't get to fully test it. We were hoping to release it in 13.1 is the reason I'm bringing this up. We were hoping to release it in 13.1, but because of that's going to touch everything, right? It's going to touch every fact type migration we do. Student level. Because of that, we wanted to do a lot of testing, and we didn't feel like we got all the testing we wanted. So we're pushing it back to 13.2. So that will be coming in 13.2. And I think that's going to be in the future slide as well. But the reason I'm giving you that context is that first change, what we put in temporarily to handle that problem was a temporary table called dim people, which basically does the same thing, right? It queries the dim people table and then uses some filtering to get a single record that's appropriate, puts it into the temp table, and then generate joins to the temp table. That way we resolved that same issue. But that was always a temporary fix until we could, in that CDS work group, get all of the state's input and get all of everybody's ideas and filter all that down to the solution everybody was good with. But because we're having to push dim people current to the next release, there was one quick change we had to make to the dim people temporary code. It was in the date logic, the filtering date logic, which is just makes it capture the dates more appropriately. So long explanation for that. And hopefully it's going to go away in the next release anyway, because dim people current will go in and the temp table stuff will be removed. For the utilities, we have two updates. So we added a new utility that, so one of the things we've been trying to do in Generate with the documentation, I'm going to show you some of this in a little bit as well, is we're trying to make Generate as visible as possible, right? It's out on the open source. You can pull the code down. You can look and see what Generate's doing. We have views and we have ways to debug the code and do validations that let you, basically see everything that's happening. We don't want anything in Generate to be a black box, right? Well, the metadata is still kind of that, right? So Generate is heavily dependent on the file specification metadata. We get that from the EdPass team. That comes down. We take that and it builds into tables in Generate. That is, if you've used the UI, that's the metadata update process that's now available. So we pull all that data down, it sits in tables, and then basically the way Generate uses that is there's a couple of different things in there. One is all of the information from the file specification. I shouldn't say all of the information, but information like what category sets does this file specification have? What categories make up that category set? What levels is this file specification reported at? So the SEA, the LEA, and the school, or what level. And then what permitted values within some of those categories. So like what are the permitted values for race? What are the permitted values for IDEA disability type and so on, right? That's all in the metadata. And then also the file submission layout. So to make sure that the file is laid out appropriately, in the right column order and all of the data is, and the header, all of that information so that the file that Generate produces passes all of the checks. That's all stored in the metadata. And the reason I say the metadata was always sort of a black box is Generate uses it in the background, but it was never anything that we had a way for you to look at unless you were comfortable going into Generate itself and querying the tables. And even some of those are like, there's lots of joins, having to join the different tables to figure out the combinations. So the utility that we added actually gives you a view of three different parts of the metadata. And we're gonna look at, and we'd love suggestions. So everybody who's on here, who does Generate work, especially if you get a chance to look at these three, if you see something else that would be beneficial for you to have a view of or to be able to access pretty quickly from the metadata that's available, let us know. We can add to this utility, right, and have it produce more results for you. But currently, what it's going to do is it runs three queries and just gives you the results. This is something that you do have to run from the back end. It is not available in the UI yet, but it is a back end utility. But when you execute the utility, basically you give it the file specification number, so like 002 for child count, for instance, and then the year, the submission year that you're working on. And it will pull the metadata that the Generate has for that combination, and it will show you all of the category sets and levels that report is reported at. So like for child count, for instance, it would say it's reported at the SEA, LEA, and school level. There are 13 category sets, and these are the category set names, like category set A, B, C. I think there are 13 at each level. It's like 5 categories and then a subtotals and a total. So it will give you all of that. It will give you the categories that make up the category set. So what is category set A? And then the second set of results that it gives you is all of the permitted values for those categories. So if there's ever a question of, race and disability type are pretty straightforward. But if there's something like education environment, for instance, right? If in the file specification there are 5 permitted values, then this will show you what those 5 are. So that way you know exactly what, at least as far as the metadata that we have, exactly what Generate is going to produce counts for. And then the third output is the submission file layout. So that if you have any questions about how Generate is laying it out or like where the data is going to be distributed in a submission file, you can see the layout in much more simple terms, right? Like you can actually see the columns and the column names, so you know what's going to go in. And if you're familiar with the file specification, they even had like filler rows and things like that. It shows you all of that. So you can see the exact layout of the submission file. So that's the new utility, which is basically just going to give you the results of those and let you be able to sort of, look at the metadata that Generate is using. The second one, entirely on me. In the previous release, I think it was 12.4, we removed the C from the beginning of the report codes, right? That is something that like the Department of Education had asked us to do for a while. And like we find it's a big undertaking to all the places that existed. But we got around to doing that and we removed the C from like tables, from stored procedures, from any place it was stored, from any place it was referenced, anything like that. And I missed the submission file comparison utility, and there's like I want to say 4 or 5 stored procedures that make up that utility. So I went through and cleaned those up and removed the thing that I missed before. So I apologize for those of you that use that. But that's cleaned up in 13.1, so you're no longer going to get any errors from that. And then the last one is updating the ETL documentation templates with any of the changes, the appropriate changes from this release. That's something we do with every release. So documentation, I'm just going to quickly go through these, but I'm going to share my screen here in just a second too. So the first one is what I'm going to share. All fact types now available. Let me show you what we're talking about here for those of you that may not have used it. I hope everybody's had a chance to go to the documentation. We've got a group of our team that is like dedicated to the documentation work. They do other stuff too, but a ton of work on the documentation. And they've just been doing incredible work getting as much documentation out there and then cleaning it up and adding more to it. So this is the introductory page to the Generate documentation. The URL, and can put that in the chat maybe. If it's something you guys have not had a chance to go look at, do that real quick. So it's in the chat. But this is the starting page. I'm just going to go to getting started. This is the navigation menu as it currently exists. We're looking at that. Is there a better way to maybe define some of this? So that could change slightly in upcoming releases. If it does, obviously we will let everybody know. We'll document that stuff as best we can. We'll talk about it in office hours, everything. So under developer again, it's migration fact type table. These are all of the fact types. Previously, we had the IDEA fact types. We also had directory. We also had membership. I think those are the ones that had been completed in the previous release. That team did a ton of work, those folks. So I am very grateful for the amount of work they're doing over there. But now we have every fact type in here. And basically what the fact type pages are, if you're not familiar with them, is it goes through what we were trying to create here and what we were hoping to do was if you were going to work on a file or a set of files, and you weren't sure, like, okay, what do I need to do, or how do I start with this, or maybe there's a gap in you're not sure what to do at a certain point. Starting from the beginning, what do you do if you're going to work on this set of files? Right. So a lot of these, once you get into like one of the fact type pages, you're going to see a lot of similarity, obviously, between, say, for instance, the child count one and the membership one and the homeless one. Because the process within Generate is very much the same. We use the same like stored procedure processes. We have the fact type name associated with it. We have views, fact type name. Once you get familiar with it, navigating the documentation becomes a lot easier. Navigating Generate becomes a lot easier. Sort of knowing what it is you need to do next becomes a lot easier. But if you were starting from scratch on a new fact type, you could open that specific fact type and it will start at the very beginning, right? And it will show you what the basic migration looks like. It'll show you what is part of that fact type if you needed to know that. And then I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it'll basically show you how to start building your ETL, where you can get information on validating your ETL information. And then you can work your way through the whole thing. It will step through the entire process. We're still we're looking at these because we're using these in states, some of the newer states or states that maybe are taking on files that are new to them. So we're trying to use this documentation. And we very much appreciate the states that are contributing to that. But as we use this documentation with states, that's how we're identifying some gaps and things like that, and seeing things like, oh, here's a place where we could add some additional information, or here's a place where a link to some additional information would be good. But there is one out there now for every fact type, except one. That is the brand new one, because I have to sort of build that out for the documentation team. So that new one, school performance indicators, I have to build that out, and then there'll be one for that. But every other fact type now has a fact type page in here. And then the other thing that they've done, which I'm, again, very, very grateful for, is they've started to add troubleshooting information wherever we can define that. So like in this case, if you're in migration again, and you go to the troubleshooting, there are now two new documents there. Um, so the user interface, like if you run into issues in the user interface, here's things you can do, ways to resolve it. And then also your report migration. So you run the report migration and any number of things happens, right? You get no data, the data comes through, but the numbers aren't what you were expecting to see, things like that, right? So this has all of the information on the different things you might encounter when you're running a report migration and how you can step through that and troubleshoot those things. So this is another thing that we're adding more of. So as we start like refining some of these processes and the documentation that goes with these processes, we're also adding the troubleshooting information that would accompany that process. So there's also some in there for installation and upgrade. There's some troubleshooting information in there for that. So you should see more of that coming as well. I think that was it. The second bullet. So the troubleshooting information. And then the last two, Azure implementations of Generate can be slightly different. We've got a couple states, Nevada's on Azure, Nebraska's on Azure, but like their installations of Generate in Azure are different. So we've been trying to document the different ways that Generate can be installed and some of the configuration things to be aware of. So we're building that out. We added more information on Azure installations, but we're also adding more. We're also working on one for AWS. So as we encounter the different variations of the ways Generate can be installed, we're trying to document those things for, any other states coming along that might be using that same technology or using it in a similar way. And then the last thing, of course, in the documentation is we'll have the 13.1 release notes. Preview of 13.2. 13.2 is slated to come out in roughly a month. I'm saying roughly because it, like Liz mentioned at the beginning, it can vary as we're doing testing and things like that. But it is a pretty quick turnaround. But like I mentioned earlier, the reason for that is one release supports the 2 January submission windows, and then the next release supports the 2 February release windows. Because those are so close together, and because there are so many files split between those two, we didn't feel comfortable trying to do all of that in one release. It was just a lot of file support and the amount of testing and everything to try to make sure that was good. Just felt like we couldn't do that justice in that amount of time. So we basically created releases that match that. So we have a release that supports January, and then about a month later, we'll have a release that supports February. That's the 13.2. Of course, if we have any file updates to any of the files that are due in February, they would be included. If we have encountered or if states have reported to us any bugs in any of the files, and this is throughout the year, if any of that's any bug issues have come up, we would be addressing those in that release. I think we went through it and we did not see any bug issues, and I don't think there were any file specification changes to the February file, so that's going to be minimal. There I mentioned the dim people current table functionality. We should be putting that into 13.2. We will continue to add accessibility improvements as we can, but again, short development window, so there may not be a lot of that. Tool enhancements is an as needed if anything we come across, like me missing the file comparison utility. But also, like I mentioned, that metadata one, right? If we get feedback from states, if there's some additional things we could add to that utility that would be beneficial, that's something we could do potentially. And then validation rules, we try to add as we can. In every release, we try to add some additional, especially as states start working on some of the additional files, like we now have support for NRD and school performance indicators. As states start working on those things, like we can add some validation rules to help support those files as well. I think that's it for the preview.
Thanks, Johnny. All right, so just looking at our release calendar. So you all know we're talking here about version 13.1 that will be coming out in the next week or so. Like Johnny discussed a second ago, 13.2 is targeted for somewhere in November. And that will be focusing on those additional January and then February files as well. Our internal team is working through the calendar release for next year. So I'm sure by the time we have these office hours for 13.2, we'll have an updated version or something at least close to it that we can point you to with potential release dates. Okay, and then this pretty much brings us to the end of the office hours. I went ahead and put this link for our evaluation in the chat. Again, it's really quick, only 2 to 3 minutes to complete. And as you all are aware and know, we do use this information. It is really valuable to us. So we appreciate it if you do take a few minutes to fill it out. I think at this point, we really just wanted to thank you all for coming and open it up to the group and see if there's any specific questions for Johnny or I. Sorry, Johnny. Ali put a question in here earlier to some of the other states. I don't know if you all saw it, but Ali, I'm just going to copy and paste it and put it back in chat. But essentially asking if some of you are having a specific issue, I guess maybe that you're seeing, Ali.
Yep, exactly. We are seeing an issue where the student detail, when we click on it, it pops up the next window, but it doesn't populate any data. When we look at the underlying data in the debug schema tables, it's there, but for some reason it's not populating. So I'm just wondering, is it just us? Maybe someone else is having a problem too?
We did have, and I apologize, we didn't document this well. There was an issue, or is an issue, with the trying to display data that was previously loaded. So you might have, so for those of you that are unaware, there's debug tables that get created when you run a migration, and it's basically that's where we pull the students out. So during the migration process, at that last step where we're actually going to aggregate and turn the actual students into a count to put into the report table, it writes those students out to tables in the background. That's what the student details is actually pulling. That's what it's displaying, is that set of tables. There is an issue with it trying to pull data that already existed in those debug tables. So it works for migrations that are run once the student details have been installed. So for instance, it came in 13. You couldn't go back to your discipline data that you submitted last year. It will come up on screen. And when you click the number, because the student detail code is in there, it will try to pop the window, but it can't read the previous tables. So there was an issue there. But if you migrate today, if you migrated your child count data or something, or membership again or if you're working ahead, we'll say you're working ahead, and you migrate your homeless data or discipline, that should work. If that's not working, Ali, then we need to look, because we have not seen that. But if other states are experiencing it as well, we'd like to know.
Johnny, this is about the chronic absenteeism. I believe you and I were looking at it, and then it was a newly migrated data. I know you're busy; you may not remember right now, since you're working with a lot of like a coding and then environments, and then so if you remember that it was like a newly initiated migration and ended, and there were some issues, some error messages, like a JavaScript error messages on the UI that you were thinking getting back to Sumant, I believe.
Yes, yeah, we were looking
So
at that.
I was just wondering if anybody else is having this issue. Is it just only us right now, or maybe anyone else's? Maybe, I don't know. Just to see if it's an environment specific.
Has anyone else started using the student details yet?
Somebody said in the chat, I mean, they love it. So I believe some people are using it.
Oh, we've been waiting to get that out there for quite a while. Lots of infrastructure to support it, and then finally was able to bring it all together. And now, like, working through any potential issues or things like that. But if anyone else is experiencing something like that, I'd really like to know. Internally, we're not seeing that. Now, 195 specifically. So, oh, and I apologize because I was going to talk about this one earlier. We have a group of states. If you've heard about the project, it's called SCADU, the Scalable Data Use Project. And this is a group of states that are working on files in Generate that have not been piloted before. And Nevada is one of those. We really thank them. Ali is working hard on 195, the chronic absenteeism file, among other files. Kentucky's doing quite a few too. There's several states in there. So reach out if that's something you're interested in. You can join that group. And that's a way also to connect with other states, right? So if you're encountering an issue, then there's a group of states there that you can reach out and have these kinds of discussions. And then we join those meetings as well. So we are there, to contribute to those conversations. But that's specifically for 195. There is an issue. I mentioned the metadata earlier. We do have an issue with the metadata for 195. Ali and I have worked through that, and I think we've got the metadata pretty well cleaned up so that it's actually appropriate for what that file specification is expecting. And I don't know if that's contributing to the issue that we're seeing, because I don't see that in other files. But Ali, I don't know if you've migrated anything besides 195 to be able to test that theory.
You might be right on that one. I didn't try anything else besides the chronic absenteeism. Maybe if I were to try something else, it would work. You might be right on that one. Yes.
Well, I know you guys are going to transition because you've got the January stuff, you've got assessments, and then you also work on like the February files as well. So I'm going to keep investigating, and I know Sumant has that error message that we produced earlier. I'm going to keep looking at that to see if there's anything in there that I can find. But when you have an opportunity, like to migrate one of those other sets, I'd be really interested because we ran into those issues specifically with 195. I don't know if that's what's impacting the student details.
Okay, I'll
But
keep that in
we'll
mind.
be able to find that out.
Yeah, I don't want to overwrite any data that we submitted, but
Right.
let me double check. If anything that
Yeah.
we haven't submitted yet, if I can rerun it, I'll do that. That's a good idea. Thanks so much.
Yeah. And so the opportunities for everybody too. So we have Discord for those of you that had joined Discord. We still have that Discord channel open. We monitor it. We're not getting as much there. I mean, I'd really love if for the folks that are out there, if you have opportunities to ask questions. The entire community gets to see it. We can open discussion threads. That's a way you can reach out if you're experiencing an issue. If you're in groups with us, like the SCADU group, if you're in groups like that, that's an opportunity to bring up issues other states might have experienced and can help. Obviously, we can jump in and help because we're in those meetings as well. We also have the issues in GitHub. So in the open source community, you can open an issue there. There is, when you open a new issue, there is an option to choose a layout of the issue. I would suggest using the bug report, even if the thing you're reporting is not a bug, because it has more information in it that's useful to everybody, to us if we're looking at it, but also to other states that might be looking at it and thinking, oh, I'm running into something similar, or I'm about to start working on this file. This is useful information to me. Even if you're looking at an enhancement or you just have a question, the bug report template just has more information in it that you can provide. But that's another way also to be able to reach out, get community support. We obviously look at those as well. So there's a couple different avenues there of ways to reach out and get help with things that you're doing, especially as new states even and more mature states are expanding into newer file sets or new files for them, but also in some cases, new files for Generate, like with the Skidoo group. Well, they're not new to Generate, but they've never been piloted in Generate. So, but anyway, there's a couple different ways that you can reach out and get support as well. And reach out to us in any of those ways if there's something we can help with, obviously, or if you run into problems that are preventing you from making progress.
And I second what Johnny said right here. This is Ollie from Nevada. If anybody is working on a chronic absenteeism, we are so close with that one. We are troubleshooting some of the data is populating in the staging table, but not in the fact table. I'm just trying to understand why they are getting dropped right now. Besides that one, we are so close with that one. If anybody needs any help on that one, I'll be happy to join you guys.
Thank you. And so hopefully you're finishing up the evaluation. Like Liz said, we really do use that. We've tried to refine these meetings over time, and I shouldn't say I don't have anything to do with that. The people that do this have done a great job of sort of refining this meeting over time based on the feedback we get and trying to make it as useful for you as possible. So if you have a chance, fill that out, but it is open. So if you have any questions, if there's something I can answer for you or attempt to answer, we've got a few more minutes for that as well.
If not, thank you all for joining. We appreciate you spending the last hour with us. It was good to see you all.